So any impressions of Sid and Ruth, feel free to put those into the chat box. We're going to officially get started. Dr. Yates, you can go ahead and take down the opening slide. Great, and now I've got this gallery view of all these beautiful people. Lovely. So welcome everyone. As we get started, I'm going to ask the presenters and panelists to have their mics on and participants to have their microphones off, just so we don't get...
You're muted, Gerard.
Did any of that come through?
Nope.
It was brilliant. That was probably the smartest thing I've said all day. So welcome everyone. As we get started, presenters and panelists, please have your microphones on. Participants, as you just saw, we muted everyone, which I had forgotten about, to unmute myself. So participants, we're going to ask you to remain muted just so we don't get any distractions from erroneous background noises. So welcome to our Parnes and Noller tribute, a joint event co-hosted by the Center for Applied Imagination at Buffalo State University and the Creative Education Foundation. My name is Dr. Gerard Puccio. I am chair and SUNY Distinguished Professor in the Center for Applied Imagination. Before going on, let me take care of a few housekeeping items. First, I want to thank our enthusiastic audience for joining us in the celebration. We had over or roughly 100 people registered for this event. The response was pretty impressive how quickly folks jumped on the registration once we announced this event. So thanks for joining us. Throughout this session, I'm going to invite you to drop your memories into the chat box. Anything that you recall from your interactions with Sid and Ruth, if you had personal interactions with them, and if you didn't, your impressions or what you've learned through oral history. This will be captured and we will keep this for future use. So please take advantage of the chat box. Also, let me remind you that this session is being recorded, and if you wish not to be recorded, to make sure that your microphone is muted and your camera is off. By the way, our technical production is being supported by Dr. David Yates, an adjunct faculty member of the Center for Applied Imagination. Sparkles to David, he is such a crucial team member. And Jane Fisher from the Creative Education Foundation, who is also serving as the official bouncer for this event. So if you get out of line, Jane's going to come after you. The event is being held in celebration of World Creativity and Innovation Day. And it occurred to me this morning as I was looking at the acronym for World Creativity and Innovation Day, WCID. It could be pronounced, and maybe I'm a little slow to catch on to these things, it could be pronounced as wicked. And so I'm hoping we are going to have a wicked good time as we reminisce about these two creativity pioneers, Dr. Ruth Noller and Dr. Sid Parnes, both of whom were instrumental in laying the foundation for our two organizations. Speaking of which, I am pleased to be joined by my co-host and colleague, Trisha Garwood. Trisha, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, great. Great to be here and to see so many familiar faces as well. I'm Trisha Garwood, and I'm currently the board chair for the Creative Education Foundation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Trisha.
Thank you.
I'll briefly introduce two of our four panelists. The core of today's session, this tribute to Sid and Ruth, really will be oral history storytelling on the part of four panelists who were students, colleagues, and friends of Sid and Ruth. So I'll briefly introduce two now. Dr. Roger Firestein, who's a senior faculty member at the Center for Applied Imagination. Roger, say hi.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
And Dr. Joe Udis, Adjunct Assistant Professor at the Center for Applied Imagination.
Hi.
And Gerard, we have from our Creative Education Foundation, we have Bill Shepard, who serves us as an advisor overall and specifically with the Sid Parnes Fellowship.
Awesome.
And go ahead and wave, Bill. And we also have Joette Field, who also serves as an advisor and also supports the Sid Parnes Fellowship. Thank you.
Terrific. So those are our four panelists. In preparation for today, our panelists were asked to think of stories that might respond to any of the following three questions. What stories about Sid and Ruth bring to life what it was like in the early days of the field of creativity? In what ways did Sid and Ruth, notice the statement starter, in what ways did Sid and Ruth embody the principles that they taught? And what are some of your fondest recollections of Sid and Ruth? So those were the questions that were posed to our panelists. I understand our panelists met yesterday to kind of coordinate their stories, and I appreciate the seriousness with which they took on this role, and we'll be hearing from them momentarily. But before we get to our panel, I want to introduce a special guest. This is World Creativity and Innovation Day, and we are blessed, really blessed, to have Marcy Siegel, who is the visionary behind World Creativity and Innovation Day, to share a bit of background relative to this special day. So, Marcy, to you.
Well, I'll do my best to keep it short. And the reason World Creativity and Innovation Day exists is to provide a spotlight for creativeness all over. As the United Nations wrote in their tweet this morning, creativity and innovation are needed to tackle the world's biggest challenges, from the climate crisis to gender empowerment to poverty and inequalities. And people have been afraid of creativity for a very long time. They would also say, I don't have time to be creative. They would say, I'm not creative, get away from me, and so on. So I thought I'd make it practical. I thought I'd give something concrete to shine a spotlight on creativeness to bring it out. So that's what World Creativity and Innovation Day is all about, is shining a light on creativeness and enabling people, supporting people, honoring your own and honoring others. And it's amazing how it's just taken off and grown. There are people in over 130 countries doing something related to releasing the creative energy. And I really, truly believe that from this, the world will be a different place with all this creativeness released. Now, how Sid and Ruth factored into this is that without them, this I don't think would have happened, because without their support, the voice that's within here might not have ever found a way to be expressed. Ruth always said, and I will remember this, that the impossible takes just a little bit longer. So when I put forward the idea of this World Creativity Day, and so many people said, you're doing what? You can't do that. That just kept going. And I will always remember Sid saying that you need a new perspective. You just need a new perspective. Look at it a different way. Look at it a different way. And it was those foundational mottos, I guess, themes that ran through as I started at the center back in the 70s and continue through to this day.
No, thank you. Thanks, Marcy. You reminded me of something I said once to a group that just sort of organically popped up, which was I firmly believe if there was more creativity in the world, there'd be more peace in the world. So kudos to you for being such a strong advocate for this and getting the United Nations behind this. So thank you for being with us, Marcy. It's just an honor to have you here.
Thanks.
So in looking at the history regarding World Creativity Innovation Day, I came across a vision statement from 2001 that stated, the purpose of World Creativity and Innovation Day was, and still is, to remind and encourage people to use their creativity to make the world a better place and to make their place in the world better too. April 21 was chosen as the World Creativity and Innovation Day to emphasize the importance of using new thinking to create a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. April 21 is the placeholder in time to give people a reason and opportunity to use imagination productively, to release new thinking, and to celebrate that. It seemed to us that as we celebrate this day, we should also honor those who came before us, those who helped to make this day possible. Of course, I'm talking about Ruth Noller and Sid Parnes, who were in every sense truly pioneers in the field of creativity. It was without exaggeration that I can say that we wouldn't be here today, as Marcy mentioned as well, celebrating World Creativity and Innovation Day, if it hadn't been for their trailblazing work. So we're here to celebrate Sid and Ruth, and to begin, we thought it would be lovely to hear from Sid and Ruth. And so we're going to start with an audio clip of Sid Parnes from the 12th Creative Problem Solving Institute in 1966. So David, can you go ahead and play that clip?
So at any rate, we've been able to do something as a result that I've been wanting to do for years, and I hope many of you will be as pleased as I am, that we're going to be able to, by telephone, bring Abraham Maslow here on Thursday night from Brandeis University, who has some fascinating things to say about creativity in its deepest philosophical sense, and we'll enter into the discussion with the panelists from the health science field that night. And I think this should make a very interesting session. Lastly, we received word, but I never did get the exact details, that Benjamin Fine, whom many of you know with the North American Newspaper Alliance, is also ill and unable to be here. Now, I did my homework ahead, and as a matter of fact, it wasn't much ahead, but it wasn't my fault. I had done it a good deal ahead, and I showed it to some people. Where's Dorothy Arisman? Dorothy? She's afraid to come. There she is. I showed her something that I had, and she says, "Ye gods, nobody would look at that. Nobody even who was interested would look at it." So I said, "Gee," this shook me up, and I said, I better do something about it. So I got busy, and you've seen me, those of you on 2E, running in and out of my room, and I've been working, and the girls have been working on the mimeograph presses, and thanks to Bert Decker and Ruth Noller down front here, who helped to translate this gobbledygook that I had put into a little clearer language. See, now I'll blame it all on them, the paper that I distributed to you. If you think it's not clear, then you see Colonel Decker particularly, because he's our communications specialist. And but seriously, I did want to have that ready, and I'd worked very hard to get that ready, but all the data is still not in on this experiment, and I'm going to make some brief comments about it, but at least you have the whole thing there in detail to take away with you and study later. I will refer to portions of it in my discussions tonight. But because I've done this, I will be free now to talk with you very informally and casually about some of the side issues and the human interest factors and so on that took place in this experiment that we had. Incidentally, if anyone was not here Sunday night, I just recalled, it was mentioned then that Mr. Moot, Wells Moot, our foundation secretary and vice president, would not be able to be here tonight, and therefore I am simply taking over and chairing this session, and will introduce the other speakers in their turn. Now, I wanted to try something real fast with you here. You've been reading, I hope, one little page or so in the workbook and dealing with this exercise of considering the difference between a judicial question, a fact-finding question, and an idea-finding question. And let's just see if we all got that point. I mean, for example, suppose I say, what is your phone number? This is a question calling for facts, ideas, or judgment. Facts. Beautiful. Chorus. And you know, yeah, what did one girl tell me in my programmed learning? And this is what I want to introduce to you, how wrong I can be and we can be when we try to teach somebody else. She writes this beautiful thing. What is your phone number is a question calling for, and there was a blank, and she says, a quick decision. Should I give it to him or shouldn't I?
I just dropped into, wasn't that lovely?
Yes.
I dropped into the chat box. If you'd like to hear the full speech, I put in the chat box a link. The Creative Education Foundation and Beth Miller were very generous in sending archival material over to Buffalo State. And we have now 300 reel-to-reel recordings from the early days of SIPSI, and 30 of those have been digitized, including the one that you just heard. And so if you go to the website that's in the chat box link, you will arrive to those recordings, including the one that you just heard. So I selected this particular 3-minute clip for a couple of reasons. First, you can hear from Sid how he lived many creativity principles, ongoing discovery, wonder, flexibility. Sid was a true learner. I recall when I shared with him my ideas for an updated version of creative problem solving, which we now call the thinking skills model. I was so nervous to share this. Here was Sid, he was the guru, and I had the gall to work on his ideas and his model. And he just listened generously. And he gave nothing but positive feedback and affirmations, and I'll never forget that. The second reason why I selected this video was to highlight the stature that Sid had in the field. You could hear a bit the network of amazing people that he interacted with, including Abraham Maslow. And then finally, Sid's a lot better at telling jokes than I am, and I thought it'd be fun to start with a laugh as a result of Sid sharing a joke. So now we're going to turn to Dr. Ruth Noller, and to introduce Ruth, I'm going to introduce my good colleague, Dr. Susan Keller-Mathers, who's an associate professor at the Center for Applied Imagination. Sue?
So I had the honor of spending quite a bit of time with Ruth down in Sarasota, because that's where I received my doctorate. And just to give you an idea, as you all know, her philosophy, and I put this in the chat as well, to help people discover who they are and to use their capabilities to the maximum in their way. So very telling of her philosophy. And so I selected this clip because I felt it highlighted the roots of Ruth's passion for teaching and for creativity studies. So David, if you'll play this clip.
I think it was my service in the Navy. As Dave has said, that I worked on the first computer at Harvard. I fought the Battle of Harvard Square for 2 years, and I worked with Commander Aiken, who was the inventor of the machine, which was 60 feet long. It wouldn't even have fit in this room. We were in a room in the basement of Croft Physics Lab at Harvard. And I think this experience had more influence on my going back to teaching. I already had a graduate degree in education, in teaching math in higher ed, or in secondary ed at that time. My doctorate was in higher ed. And here I was stuck with a commanding officer who believed that colleges and universities were great places except for the students. And his philosophy was that if you knew your subject, you could teach it. Well, I didn't agree with him. And that's where creativity came into my life. It had been kind of fringe to it all the way through. But that was where he convinced me that my place was back in education. And that was pretty nearly the time that Jenny Graham, as the only person on the faculty at the university, would chance something as strange as creativity. And Jenny, in the Department of Retailing, invited Sid Parnes to leave his job in business to come to the university. And I will never forget the first class that I taught in Retailing 235. And one of the prospective students came in and said he must be in the wrong room. And I said, how come? He said, well, I expected the instructor to be hanging from the chandelier or something strange like that, since this is creativity. And I said, stick with us. You'll find that there's a lot more to creativity than have the instructors hanging off the chandeliers. So he continued with me for at least a semester, and I think a full year, and decided that yes, there was more to it than met the eye.
Doesn't that warm the heart? So now that we've heard from Sid and Ruth, let's hear stories about Sid and Ruth and celebrate the remarkable legacy and impact that they've had on others. And so, Trish, I'm going to turn it over to you to kickstart our panel.
Thank you, Gerard. Well, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Bill Shepard. I know many of you already know Bill, but Bill first met Sid Parnes and Ruth Noller at the Creative Problem Solving Institute in 1972, and both were among his teachers in the graduate program at Buff State. In the years that followed, he utilized the concepts and tools of creative problem solving in his professional life as a manager. However, in 1984, Sid Parnes offered Bill a full-time position with the Creative Education Foundation. As Bill puts it, I can't imagine how different my life would be if I had not accepted Sid's offer. For the next 18 years, Bill served the Creative Education Foundation in a variety of roles, including director of the Creative Problem Solving Institute and ultimately as the managing director of the Creative Education Foundation. Bill's time at the foundation provided an incredible ongoing opportunity to learn from Sid as they worked together on programs domestically and across the globe. After working at the Creative Education Foundation, Bill joined a creativity and innovation professional services firm, applying creative problem solving in a wide range of corporate applications. Clients included dozens of corporate 500 organizations. Most recently, Bill has served the Creative Education Foundation by chairing the Sidney Parnes Fellowship and being on the founding committee of the Ruth Noller Research Grant. In retirement, Bill continues to use his creative problem solving facilitation skills as a volunteer with several Buffalo-based organizations. Bill, you've done it all. Let's hear some of the background.
Thank you, Tricia. What a wonderful event to be invited to participate in. You know, today we take for granted that people and institutions and organizations recognize the critical importance and the essential nature of creativity and innovation. It's easy to forget that that's not always been the case. In the late 60s, early 70s, there was considerable doubt that creativity was something that everyone could obtain, doubt whether it could be taught, and considerable question if it even had a place in academia. That was the environment full of headwinds that Sid Parnes and Ruth Noller faced. There's no doubt in my mind that Ruth can be held up as a great example of courage, the courage it takes to face resistance and to create change. We all know that Ruth loved mathematics. It was her chosen field of study, and for a number of years, she held a faculty position in the mathematics department at UB. As she mentioned in the video, she did teach in retailing some of the creativity courses while her full-time job in the mathematics department. Now imagine yourself in that position, comfortable and secure, teaching a subject that you love at the university level. Imagine now that a colleague comes up to you and says something like this: how about you move away from mathematics, your chosen field of study, leave UB, and take a leap of faith with me and step into a little-known, unproven, struggling to emerge field called creativity. Imagine the courage that took. But that was Ruth Noller. And I think it's not hyperbole to say that it is because of the courage, resilience, and sense of purpose of Ruth Noller and Sid Parnes. It's because of that we have the Center for Applied Imagination and the Creative Education Foundation today. CIPSE, as we knew it at that time, was not the only process that existed. There were others emerging as well. Sid never viewed these other approaches as competition. He saw them as opportunities to collaborate and to learn. He used to say to us, it's all soup. There's chicken noodle soup, there's beef barley soup, there's tomato soup, but it's all soup. And the same thing is true of process. There's different processes, but it's all about helping people tap into that natural human condition of creativity. Sid rejected the notion that there was one right way to view process. Gerard, in his opening comments, talked to us about Sid's ongoing learning and reflection. Even his own thinking about process and how it could be depicted morphed over time. I know from my conversations with him that ultimately Sid saw CPS as an organizing framework open to the inclusion of approaches and tools from a wide range of sources, a metacognitive framework, if you will. Just one example of Sid's willingness to be open to many perspectives comes from back in 1981. Sid arranged for John Moffat to go and study at Kempner-Trago, one of the processes available at that time. Scotty Saxon and Don Treffinger, Sid sent to SES, Synectics Education Systems, and Roger Firestein and I went to Synectics to learn and to bring back perspectives on similarities and differences between the processes and what could be used productively tied to CPS. The learnings were rich, and the discussions with Sid after our return were incredibly fruitful. Sid was a connector, and Gerard also mentioned this in his opening remarks. He deliberately and successfully made connections. It's through his many connections that giants in the field like J.P. Guilford, Don McKinnon, Paul Torrance, Frank Barron, George Prince, and a host of others came to Buffalo, where students at the center and participants at CIPSE could interact and learn from them. Sid loved to use cartoons to illustrate and underscore points about creativity in his books, in his classes, and as part of the programs that he led. One of my favorite cartoons that he used appears on page 136 of his book, The Magic of Your Mind. You may be familiar with it. It's the cartoon of the two prisoners, shackled arms and legs high on the wall of a prison cell in a seemingly impossible situation with absolutely no possible escape. At that point, one prisoner turns to the other and says, "Now here's my plan." That cartoon always reminds me of an occasion when I went to San Diego to visit Sid and his wife, Bee. And I have to mention here that it's difficult to talk about Sid without talking about Bee, who was not only his partner in life, but his partner in his work. They were truly a total package. They were living at that time in San Diego in a senior citizen community. And as I walked in, they were sitting in the lobby waiting for me. And we found this living room area, kind of an area. And what we did is we sat down in the sofas and we talked and started to catch up. Well, it was time for lunch, and B started calling us over to come to the lunchroom. Well, Sid at that time was using a walker to support himself. And as we started to move towards the lunchroom, Sid had left the walker behind, and B very quickly reminded him, "Sid, bring your walker." So he got his walker, and as we're walking, B was ahead of us, and he put his arm out, he put his hand out and he grabbed my arm and just kind of pulled me back, like, let's wait a minute. And as B continued to go forward, he said, "Bill," he said, "she doesn't know it, but I have a plan to get rid of this thing." It's a perfect example of Sid as the unrelenting optimist. He always saw the good in an idea and in people. He truly believed, and he lived the belief, that any situation or challenge could be made better with a little application of CPS, resulting in a solution and a plan. I'm sure that my colleagues on the panel today would agree that we're so fortunate to have had the opportunity to have learned from, worked with, and been friends with two giants, two pioneers in our field, two people that we knew simply as Ruth and Sid. Thank you.
There it is.
There you go,
Hey,
grand
all
finale.
right.
That's great.
Oh, Bill, that fantastic. Oh my gosh. So thank you and the personal stories and that rich piece. So thank you so much. Joette, I'm going to introduce you right away to get you on there as well. Joette has also been a part of the Creative Education Foundation, the Creative Problem Solving Institute, and the Center for Applied Imagination since 1970, when she was a student participating in the 2-year research study with Dr. Sid Parnes and Ruth Noller that determined that, hey, surprise, creativity can be taught. In case you didn't know, she figured it out with them. So this laid a foundation for her teaching and consulting career over a lifetime of sharing those skills. Joette has taught programs in creative problem solving from kindergarten through grade 12 throughout the Buffalo metropolitan area, and created staff development programs at Damon University, where she also serves as an adjunct professor in the leadership and innovation program. So truly creative education all the way through. Joette's an active member of the Creative Education Foundation, most recently training and counseling the Sid Parnes Fellows as they carried their creative problem solving knowledge into their workplace and into their community. Now, she credits her success as a wife, mother of 4, grandmother of 6, to the applied skills, tools, and techniques she acquired not only in her early years with Sid and Ruth, but also with the rich creative community, Hello Community, which has cultivated and refined these skills and serves as a foundation for lifelong learning. Joette, thank you.
Well, thank you, Tricia. My goodness. I just have to say I am honored and I am humbled to be in the midst of this group today and all of the people in the past that led me to where we are. And I'm going to tell some stories. The first of which starts with in 1970, we'll set the stage, when Sid was determined to come in and do a creative studies project, a 2 years research project, which Tricia mentioned, did want to have the goal of, can creativity be taught? Well, indeed it could. But imagine my surprise when I walked into class the first day, looking around the room and going, wow, this is a very thick-walled brick room. And Sid, being Sid, told his first story. And just like the elfish person, he always bopped around campus saying, you know, I wanted to teach this course and Buff State couldn't give me a room. So in true Sid fashion, he went on a fact-finding mission around the campus looking for a room to teach in. He found a half-occupied custodial room, which, to make a long story short, he transformed with very meager supplies, including one green portable chalkboard, our first creative studies class. That in and of itself set the stage for me, and my learning began to soar. I finally knew what it was to learn. And everything Sid said and did went from there. It was just a beautiful way to learn how to learn. And that's exactly what Sid did. He taught us how to learn. He was the perfect embodiment of what he taught. When Gerard gave us the challenge to talk about how Sid and Ruth embodied what they taught, they were what they taught in everything they said and did, or should I say modeled. Sid taught by being Sid. He was a man without an ego, a person whose bottom line was integrity, and whose goal was to change the world. Well, over the 50 plus years that I have been honored to know Sid and be a part of his legacy, has he ever changed the world? Story 2. We're going to fast forward to the 1990s, Ruth Noller. So after I left Buff State and started carrying forth all of the skills I learned in a variety of ways, I was in Williamsville teaching, and one of my colleagues, who was the gifted programming specialist, came up to me and said, hey, Joette, she said, what do you know about Ruth Noller? So I kind of laughed because she didn't know anything about my background. And I said, why is that? She said, well, I'm getting my master's degree at then the International Center for Studies in Creativity. She said, and I want to do it on Ruth Noller. Well, imagine my absolute surprise and happiness. So I said, yeah, I know a little bit about her. How'd you like to meet her? So we went to meet Ruth in her summer home in Casadega, where she welcomed everybody. Ruth had a policy with always telling everybody with whom she was in contact, my door is open. Come in and talk about anything you want. Just come in here and sit. Come in here and chat. So when my colleague and I drove to Casadega and walked in, she said, come on, let's have some lunch, which, great in Ruth fashion. And then she started to tell a story. And her story involved that Mark I computer that she worked with at Harvard with Grace Hopper. And she stands up in her very stature and militaristic fashion at times, goes and gets a stack of black and white photos and starts pulling out a picture of Grace Hopper, the Mark I, and a moth. And she said, see that moth? She said, that's the bug that was in the computer. You know how people say their computers have a bug? Well, this really did. That's where that term came from. And she told it in her understated Ruth fashion. Ruth always understated anything and everything she did. From her musical ability as an excellent violinist to her mathematical ability, and as Bill so beautifully said, having the courage to take that step out and enter into a world of creativity, which was unparalleled with Sid. So let's go on to my third very brief story. After we attended the 2-year study, the Creative Studies project, there were many of us who just couldn't let go of Sid and Ruth. Our lives had changed dramatically. So we said, what can we do now? We can't leave this behind. So this was in like 1971, 72. We started making up courses to teach independent studies, so to speak, at Buff State. The first one was in a nursing home, then on Buff State at the time, because they had taken one of the dorms and there was a nursing home there for a year or two. So Sid goes, I just create a course and teach the people in the nursing home. I did at the ripe old age of 20. Then he threw myself and a colleague into a really challenging situation, as in design an 8-week course for the American Institute of Banking. You'll be going downtown Buffalo teaching bankers. Let's talk about being thrown into the fire. But that's what Sid did. That's what Ruth did. We just learned through experience. We learned through reflection. We learned to learn that mistakes were nothing but opportunities to look at. And the debriefs we had from there provided such a rich foundation for everything we did from then on. It taught me and so many people to live up to my potential, to teach all ages, all backgrounds, all abilities, including having the marvelous opportunities of teaching in Brazil and in South Africa with John Osborne, which was so incredibly fun and just the culmination of what we wanted, what Sid wanted to see. So I'm honored to be here. And here's how I'd like to close. Sid and Ruth, the yin and the yang, the right and the left, the up and the down, the divergence and convergence, the dynamic balance. Thanks.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous. Thank you. And I'm glad that we've got that quote in there so we can have that. So thank you so much, Bill and Joette, for serving the Creative Education Foundation and all of that. And Gerard, I hand it over to you. We've got some other great folks with experience.
Wow, those are tough acts to follow, but I am confident that the two colleagues I'm about to introduce are up to the challenge. They both have very storied backgrounds, remarkable set of experiences. I could go on some time with the biographies, but in the essence of time, because we're running a bit behind, I'm going to truncate the introductions. Though I will remind participants to share your stories as well. Please drop your stories and your memories into the chat box so that we can capture those. And we'll continue with our panel. So I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Roger Firestein, who's an associate professor and senior faculty member at the Center for Applied Imagination at Buffalo State University and president of Innovation Resources. He guest lectures at the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences at the University of Buffalo. Roger has presented programs in creativity to over 600 organizations nationally and internationally, ranging from major Fortune 500 corporations to government agencies, universities, associations, and churches. And Roger was my teacher. And so, Roger, I turn the mic over to you.
As Sid was my teacher. So, Joette, Bill, this is a hard act to follow, but I'm gonna do my best so I can. Here's the story. This is the mid 1970s. I'm a student at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado, about 6 miles from our farm where I grew up. And I got really interested in creativity. And so I started reading books about creativity. And there was 2 names and one place that came up consistently in the literature about creativity. And it was Sid Parnes and Ruth Noller. So it's April of 1977. I'm staying at my parents' house on the farm. And I found the phone number of the department, the Interdisciplinary Center for Creative Studies, something like that. And I get the courage and I dial up the phone, right? And I call the number, which is still.
Wait, Raj, what was this?
That was dialing the phone. That's dialing the phone.
You
I
had a
dialed
rotary
the phone, a rotary phone.
Okay.
This is 1977, Gerard, all right? Rotary phone. And so Jenny, the secretary, answers, and I explain to her who I am. And that I'm interested in this. And she said, well, Dr. Parnes is here. Would you like to talk to him? And so it's like, now I'm 21 years old, okay? I'd never met an author in my life, okay? All the authors that I knew were dead, all right? And so here I am, I'm gonna talk to this giant Sid Parnes. Sid Parnes gets on the phone with this kid from Northern Colorado and talks about the program. He says, yes, we have this annual Creative Problem Solving Institute, and we just started this master's degree program. Why don't you come out? In Sid's way. I hung up the phone. I was trembling, and I ran up the stairs and I said to my mom, I said, Mom, I just talked to Sid Parnes in Buffalo, New York. Do you know what she said? She said, what? You made a long distance phone call? Phone calls from rural Colorado were pretty expensive back then. In 1977, I came to the 24th Annual Creative Problem Solving Institute, met Sid, took a 2-week course after that with Ruth and with Joe. And one of the things and then when Sid retired in 1984, I was fortunate enough to move into that position. The beautiful thing about Sid is Sid pioneered the idea of deliberate creativity. And the idea of deliberate creativity is turning on your creativity at will instead of waiting for it by chance for it to happen. And I love Sid's words. He says, there is such a thing as conscious, deliberate effort in sitting down and searching for alternate, different directions, solutions, and ideas. And many of you remember in 2009, there was a tribute for Sid at D'Youville University. And Dr. Teresa Mobley gave the keynote address there. And she talked about Sid as the person who democratized creativity. He made it available for everybody. Now, Sid didn't cloak his findings in some academic jargon or some complicated language. And Sid was also not the kind of a person that staked a claim on his little section of intellectual property. As Bill and Joette have already talked about, it's all soup, all right? Sid shared his work with others, and he encouraged his students and his SIPSI participants to do that as well. Couple stories. Now, not many people know this, but Sid invented the Post-it note. Okay, not really. I'm going to back that down a little bit, okay? Sid invented the concept of the yellow Post-it note. Sid traveled a great deal in his work with the creative education, and when Sid would return from a trip or from a long weekend, he would often appear with a handful of yellow strips torn from a yellow legal pad. Bill and I were talking about this yesterday. Sometimes they weren't yellow strips, they were just pieces of an envelope, right? Yeah. And each strip would contain an idea that he'd written down or something he wanted to research or just a reminder of something needed to be done. So Sid would walk in and he'd have this bouquet of these yellow Post-it notes. These yellow strips of paper, the precursor to Post-it notes, and he began to hand them out to everybody. And he just delighted in that. And it was his way of collaborating, coming up with new ideas. And as we talked yesterday, sometimes it didn't make it to a yellow strip of paper. It was the side of an envelope. And Bill mentioned yesterday how he would come home and from work, and all these notes from Sid would be in his pocket. Favorite. This is a story, and Sue, you'll relate to this. And some of the other folks as well. One of Sid's favorite drinks was a beer float. Beer floats, all right? And that's right. And not a root beer float, but a beer float. And Sid delighted in plopping a scoop of vanilla ice cream in a local beer purchased at the convenience store. Now, when Sid would invite us out to the house for beer floats after a SIPC or for an event, we were all just delighted to be there. We all drank the floats. We all said we liked the floats. But I don't know any of us who had a beer float when Sid wasn't around, okay? And because we loved those and respected Sid so much, we managed to choke them down, all right? So Sid and his beer floats. So also, I just want to echo what my colleagues said, and just to all of you today, it was not only Sid was the yin and Ruth were the yin and yang, and Ruth was my mentor teacher. Ruth's name is the same as my mother's name, so we got very close on that. And I know that Joe will talk about it a bit more later. But I really think in addition just to their whole ability to be creative, their whole spirit of creativity, there was also just their love for not only their work, but their students. And so to Ruth and Sid, many tributes.
Wow. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Jerry. It's my pleasure. I'm honored. Thank you. Thank you.
So happy to have all of you here, and I'm just finding myself getting very much caught up in the stories, and I can picture so clearly as you tell the stories, and the stories are so riveting. I think we're not getting many entries in the chat box because it's such attention to the story. So we will have one more panelist share her stories. Again, I will encourage you, if you have stories that you'd like to share, please put them into the chat box. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Joe Udis, who's an adjunct assistant professor at the Center for Applied Imagination. She is currently the Creativity and Change Leadership Department Distance Program Coordinator, plays an instrumental role in recruiting and communicating with our distance students. Joe has received numerous awards. I don't have time to go through all of them, but I will highlight a few. She has received the Chancellor's Award for Medal for Excellence in Adjunct Teaching. This is the highest award an adjunct can receive at SUNY. This comes directly from the Chancellor. She has 5 Faculty Appreciation Awards for Campus Life and 6 Outstanding Service Learning Class Awards from Civic and Community Engagement. I give you Dr. Joe Udis. Joe.
Thank you, Gerard. I have so many stories, it's very hard to pick, but here's what I chose. Roger mentioned 1977, this SIPC, and that was when I first found out about SIPC because I was working at Campfire, and Ruth was on the board of Campfire, and she invited the entire staff to SIPC for a one-day experience. We had a problem-solving day at SIPC. And I fell in love with it. And she said, well, you should take the master's program. And I said, well, I can take one class. I have a free class coming. She said, great, you can start this summer. Well, I couldn't start immediately. So Roger mentioned there were 2 classes after SIPC. He took the first one. And in the second one, he was the facilitator and I was in the class. So he was my first facilitator. And he's 1 week ahead of me in the program.
1 week.
But Ruth continued to encourage me, and I kept saying, Ruth, it's going to be hard. I work 60 hours a week. I'm a single parent with 2 young children. It's hard to find the time. Some of the days that you have classes, I just can't come. And she said the same thing every time. Joe, there's always another way. And there always was. She made another way. She made it happen. I took courses by contract. I was assistant in some of her undergrad classes. Whatever she said to do, I did. And one of the things I want to remind everyone is that creative studies classes are not like classes in regular programs at school. because they're interactive, they're active, we do things, and a lot of it is fun. And one of the things that I remember best about Ruth in that sense is that she felt that puns were the highest form of humor. And one night we had a class we had a book called Strange and Familiar. If you're not familiar with it, that was one of the textbooks we formerly used. And she talked about her interest in puns. And somehow we had an entire class full of fish puns. And everybody sat around and tried to think up a way to use a fish in a sentence and still connect it to creativity. And Ruth thought it was fun. She said, but we do it just for the halibut. So that's the kind of story Ruth had. She was my mentor as well. And everything that I feel that I've been able to do in the program was really inspired by Ruth. Sid was an inspiration too, a little bit different type of inspiration. You might all remember that he liked to explain the process using one of these. You recall this? Because it demonstrated different steps, divergent and convergent, divergent, convergent, divergent, convergent. And at one point, the process was laid out like this with these kind of things. And he would bring that out to explain how things worked. One of the strong memories I have about Sid is one of the courses I had, I believe it was 610, but this was a facilitation course. And the final exam was one class period. I think we had about a 3-hour class period, and he divided the time up between all the students, and everybody would have the same amount of time. So the first student had to go through the creative problem solving process and then move to the next and the next. Well, the first student ran over time, so the rest of the time got shortened. And the next student went over time, and the time got shortened. And the time kept getting shortened. And I was last because of my alphabetical name. And I had 5 minutes to do the process. And I actually did it. And what it showed me is that Sid always challenged me to do things that I didn't think I could do. And I always did them because he asked me to. And I just did it. Don't think about it, just do it. And I'll never forget that. Think about Sid and Ruth and all the things that they accomplished by setting up our program at Buffalo State. And the program still continues, and it has gotten bigger and bigger. And we now have both a campus-based program for master's students and a distance program for master's students. Little plug, since I'm the coordinator of the distance program. And we have students from all over the world. I just spoke with one from Australia, one from China. They're coming in this summer, and it's very exciting to see where they come from and how they're going to get connected with us. If you're interested, or you know someone who might be interested in finding out more about the program, I put my email address in the chat so that you could get in touch with me. But just remember that it wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be in this program without Ruth and without Sid. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. So your final story, Tricia, makes me think about how time kept shrinking for Joe, and then she just had a few minutes for her final exam. I'm kind of feeling like that right now as we come to the end, as we wrap up our tribute to Sid and Ruth. So here's our challenge. We may run a few minutes over. If you need to drop out, that's fine. This will be recorded. It is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available. But we forewarned someone prior to today, and he has shown up, and that gentleman is John Osborne. And John Osborne has been spotlighted. and John. So your challenge, like Joe's final exam where she had only 5 minutes, I'm going to give you a whole 45 seconds to perhaps share your perspective, a memory, your reaction to this session, however you'd like to fill that half minute or 45 seconds. So thank you for being here, John, and from the Osborne family and your perspective, your tribute to Sid and Ruth. You're muted, John. You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. I also want to just acknowledge that two organizations represented here today, Creative Education Foundation and the Buffalo State Center for Creativity, and various names over the years, but particularly led by Gerard and Tricia and Beth, and everybody who's worked there, and Bill over the years. And it's just amazing how important these groups have been to keep the legacy going. Now that's almost 45 minutes, but I never really knew my grandfather in the creativity field, except one embarrassing moment when he created some drama, little mini drama, to give my father some golf clubs for his birthday that involved me crying at the age of 13. I did not like that, but I did get to know him through Sid and Ruth. And Ruth, I got to work closely with her daughter, her sons, I'm sorry, David and Paul, who we used to sit in the student aid room and at SIPSI and make up amusing things to tell one another, like snot, the original rubber cement. And so that was, but they were wonderful guys, very creative. And Ruth, I got to, visit in her home and stuff. And she was always, a very strong role model. But Sid really gave me a lifeline to my grandfather. So I'm over 45 seconds, but I'm just going to say one example of that is I asked Sid, I got a chance on the board of CEF to get to know him. One day he was driving me around San Diego where we had Winterfest. He said, this reminds me of how your grandfather drove me around when I was a young fella. And I was always nervous about whether he was going to make the right turns or even like get us there safely. But I said to Sid, well, that must have been really interesting, your dynamic, because we learned about left brain, right brain thinking. I said to Sid, so you must have, and because the Sid I knew was just flowing with I would call it unself-contained, a flow of creativity. I said, well, you must have been the right brain, and my grandfather, who was in business and stuff, must have been the left brain and side. And he said, no. He said the opposite. Your grandfather brought me in to put some structure into this creative thinking, but he was a wild right brain person. And that's not the grandfather I knew, or but that's how that pairing happened. And then bringing in a math major, a major person in the field of math. Those were all like forced fittings, which is part of creativity. And I think the three of them made magic together. I wish I had seen my grandfather at a SIPSI or in the academic setting, but because I knew Sid, I got that. That's it. Thanks.
Well, John, thank you. Thanks for joining us. So Tricia, with that, I think we need to sadly begin to wrap this up.
I know, what a day. What a day.
Yeah.
What a legacy. I think, Dave, we've got a couple slides to wrap it up. Gerard?
Oh, yes, actually, that would be,
sorry,
that would be me.
Oh, is that you? Okay, so I'm
That's me.
cueing you.
I
I'm
have
like,
the slide, so let
someone
me
is
bring
going to
up
bring
the
up some
slides so you
slides. We were all very caught up in the stories. Oh my gosh, this like changes the whole trajectory of the day, right? So great. So on behalf of the Creative Education Foundation, I would like to thank you all for helping us celebrate Sid Parnes and Ruth Noller's legacy. We are so excited. We are so proud to be working with Buff State to expand our work together in celebration of our shared legacy. As we just heard, It's so critical, right? It is that shared legacy. And let's work together to forge new and exciting frontiers in creativity. As you can see from this slide, we hope to see many of you in person in June so we can continue to build our connections.
Great. And I didn't put these together into one slide deck, so let me slide my window over to my closing slide. Love these photos of Sid and Ruth. So we wouldn't be here. Marcy mentioned this early on. We wouldn't be here today if it hadn't been for Sid and Ruth, and our program wouldn't have had such an amazing foundation from which to build and sustain growth. And you know that the undergraduate and graduate programs at Buffalo State were pioneered by Sid and Ruth, and they've continued to grow now over the 52 years that we've been in existence. And in that growth, we've got a wider range of programs, including 2 micro-credentials, 1 in applied creative thinking, 1 in creative education. We offer a SUNY Advanced Graduate Certificate, which is 6 courses. Of course, the cornerstone that was put in place by Sid and Ruth was the Master of Science degree. And this is the key piece I wanted to mention. We continue to expand, and targeting fall of 2024, we hope to introduce a doctorate in creativity and change leadership, which is a tribute to the legacy established by Sid and Ruth. And thanks to modern technology, all of these programs are now available for distance learners. So the reach has always been and continues to be quite international. I have to say, when I walk down the halls of Chase Hall, where we've been located for 50 some years, occasionally I'll think to myself, these were the same halls and same offices occupied by Sid and Ruth. And because of their work, we have a remarkable accumulation of wisdom, both at the Creative Education Foundation and at Buffalo State. And so let's continue to make Sid and Ruth proud. I want to extend a shout out to Beth Miller and the Creative Education Foundation for supporting this event. And let's all go out and have a wicked good day. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Thank you.
This was great.